Hello everyone, hope all of you are doing fine. In this particular lecture, we are going to discuss the certified copy of law as well as audit of November 2019. This is my certified copy itself. In this lecture, I will be telling you how to present your answers in auditing as well as in law so that you can score good marks. Okay, so nevertheless, I have not scored that good marks as compared to my other subjects. In law, I have just scored 55 out of 100, and in audit, I have scored 59 out of 100. So this is out of 70, and 32 is nothing but out of 70, which is very bad score, which is lesser than 50% also. And if we just quickly see the MCQ part, I have scored 23 in the law MCQs. Okay, so I've scored a total of 32 plus 23, which is 55 out of 100. And in auditing also, I've scored 59 out of 100, which is a decent score. I've scored 22 in the MCQ portion, and I've scored 37 in the subjective part. Okay, so let's analyze where I did the most of my mistakes. So first, let's analyze the certified copy of law. Once we analyze the certified copy of law within the first half an hour, I would quickly switch to the certified copy of audit, and in the end, I would be recommending what are the major areas of practice for MCQs and how do we present better in order to fetch the maximum marks in these theoretical subjects. Okay, let's begin with law first. I will be discussing the certified copy of law now. Let's begin with which question I solved first in my certified copy. Let's begin with that question itself. Question number 4A. Okay, let's switch to question number 4. X Stock Exchange Limited was granted recognition by SEBI. The stockbrokers of the stock exchange did not pay much heed, that is attention, to the concept of governance and focused on increasing their wealth and snubbed the protection of investors. Their activities were against the interests of the trade and general public. Now we are required to examine whether the central government SEBI has the power to withdraw the recognition granted to X Stock Exchange Limited under the provisions of Securities Contract Regulation Act, and whether a person can be a member of an unrecognized stock exchange for the purpose of performing any contracts in securities. Let's quickly look at the suggested answers, and let's quickly look at my certified copy's answer. Okay. So section 5 subsection 1 of SECRA states that if the SEBI is of the opinion that the recognition granted to a stock exchange in the interest of the trade or in public interest be withdrawn, then the central government or SEBI may serve on the governing body a written notice that the central government is considering the withdrawal of the recognition for the reasons stated therein, and after giving an opportunity of being heard, the SEBI may withdraw the recognition granted to the stock exchange. Okay, thus the central government can withdraw the recognition of stock exchange limited on the grounds that their activities were against the interests of the trade and general public. This was a very simple question, and only if you write the provisions of section 5 subsection 1 of SECRA, you would score the maximum marks. Okay, so there has been a lot of controversies in my law paper. I don't know why I have not fetched good marks despite the fact that I have written the answer up to the mark. See, if you see the certified copy, first I have written the section name, that is section 5 of the SECRA. This is the section given in the suggested answers as well. Then I wrote the provision, which is exactly the same as given in the suggested answers. The CG may withdraw the recognition of a stock exchange if it is in the public interest. The CG shall record the reasons of doing so and grant an opportunity of being heard. I'd also underlined all the key points. This is how you're going to present your answers in the examination. Okay. Then CG shall publish the order in the official gazette. All the contracts entered into by the stock exchange shall be valid if they are entered before the date of passing of order of CG. This was an additional thing which I had written in my examinations answer sheet, but still I was not able to fetch good marks. I don't know why. Currently, the powers under this section have been delegated to SEBI. I was keen enough, I was smart enough to write this also, because the section states central government has the power, but then it also states that these powers have been delegated to SEBI. Okay, every stock exchange shall apply for recognition in order to perform any contracts in securities as per the relevant provisions of SECRA 1956. So what was my conclusion? Therefore, the SEBI has the power to withdraw recognition to stock exchange if it is in the interest of trade and public. For this, I only scored 1 mark. And for the next answer, which is also correct, I scored another mark. Let's quickly read the next subpart. Suggested answers law. Yeah. So as per section 19 of the SECRA, no person shall organize or assist in organizing or be a member of any stock exchange for the purpose of assisting in entering into or performing any contracts in securities except with the approval of central government or SEBI. Hence, no person can be a member of an unrecognized stock exchange for the purpose of performing any contracts in securities except with the approval of central government or SEBI. And here I wrote the provision in the earlier part, and I wrote the conclusion, and a person cannot be a member of unrecognized stock exchange to perform contracting securities. I scored 1 and 1 mark only for the conclusion. The examiner did not give me marks for my earlier provisions and analysis. Okay, I wrote the section number. Usually students don't quote the section number of SECRA, like it is not possible for a human mind to memorize each and every section number. But as I told you that I had written all the section name and section number on a piece of paper, because of which I was able to memorize them very carefully. I'll quickly show you how I had written each and every section name and section number, law and law important section. Okay, this is the PDF. I've already shared this PDF in my YouTube channel, and the link of this PDF is given in the description box. You can download the same if you want. But then this is the thing which I had jotted down on a separate piece of paper, and I had remembered them separately. So let's quickly see SECRA. The SECRA Act, if you see, I have written over here section 5.2, section 5.1. Okay, I'll just highlight it for the sake of convenience. So section 5.1 is what withdrawal of recognition if it is in the public interest. Section 5.2 is nothing but withdrawal of recognition for failure to corporatize. And this is how I was able to memorize almost all the section name and section number. Okay, this PDF you can get it on my YouTube channel itself, which is named as Kushal Lodha itself, and you can download the link for this PDF. These are my summary notes which I have prepared. Okay, so let's quickly go back to OneNote. Okay, so the format of writing your answer should be what? It should be section name, section number, then the provisions which is there. I'll quickly show you section name, then the provision. You can also write a separate section as analysis if you want. What you can do, you can write the section name first, draw a line always. Okay, so don't draw a line, of course, I'm sorry. The margin is given. You can write the section and the provision name on the left side of the margin. It's all right. Just write the question number carefully on the top and begin by writing the answer in the following format. Section name should be written first, then write the provision. Write it in full words, of course, don't write this N. This is just a short form. Provision, then do an analysis, and finally you should write your conclusion. Okay, this should be an ideal format to present your answers in the examination, because if you see the answer over here, whatever I have written, it looks very neat and clean. Okay, so even though that I was not able to score good marks in this question, I think that I should have got at least 4 or 5, like 4 marks at least, because there is no mistake which I have made in this question. I don't know what was going on in the mind of examiner, but that's all right. I have not scored good marks. There's no point in complaining now. Let's move on to the next sub question. Question number 4B. The composition of audit committee of MKBTC Limited, an unlisted public company, as on 31st March 19 comprised of 7 directors, including 4 independent directors. The majority of the members of the audit committee has the ability to read and understand the financial statements, but none of them has accounting or related financial management expertise. This is an LODR question. The company listed its securities in a recognized stock exchange in the month of August 2019, referring to the regulations of Securities and Exchange Board of India, decide whether the existing audit committee can continue after listing its securities. Okay, let's quickly read the regulation and the provisions of LODR Regulation 18. So as per Regulation 18 of SEBI, every listed entity shall constitute a qualified and independent audit committee which shall have minimum 3 directors. 2/3 of the members of audit committee shall be independent directors. All members of audit committee shall be financially literate, and at least 1 member shall have accounting or related financial management expertise. This is the provision which you have to write. As for the facts of the question, now this is the analysis part. See, this was the provision as per Regulation 18. This is nothing but an analysis. Once you do an analysis, you have to write the conclusion based on the analysis and the provision involved. See, the audit committee already has 7 directors as members, which is in compliance. The audit committee has 4 directors as independent directors. However, once the company gets listed, at least 5 directors shall be independent directors. Thus, they need to change the composition of audit committee once the company gets listed. Because 2/3 of 7 is what? 5. And currently 4 directors are independent directors. In the existing audit committee, though majority of the members have the ability to read and understand the FS, but none of them has accounting or related financial management expertise. However, once the company gets listed, it is required that all members of audit committee shall be financially literate, and at least 1 member shall have accounting or related financial management expertise. One advice which I would like to give all of you is that there is no sense in repeating these points. See, these points have already been mentioned in the provision part. So there is no sense that you repeat this point again. If you see, this is the provision, and this has been repeated over here. This is just going to waste your time. So instead, what you should do, Just write down the provision and quickly in the conclusion itself write down the reason why there should be change in the composition of audit committee. Okay, so in view of the above, the existing audit committee cannot continue after listing its securities. I have written the same answer but still I have not scored the full marks. I'll quickly show you how I have written and how I have presented this answer. Question 4b. See, first I wrote the regulation number. Okay, regulation 18 of LODR 2015. Again, don't get shocked by the fact that I was able to memorize almost all the regulations. So I did not memorize all the regulations, to be honest. I just memorized 4 regulations, 18, 19, 20 and 21, which are of audit committee, risk management committee, nominations committee. So I don't remember the exact regulation number of each and every committee. But at the time of examination, I knew that regulation 18 is of audit committee. Then I wrote the provision. See, it will comprise of not less than 2/3 of the directors as independent directors. All the members should have the ability to read and understand the FS, and at least one member should have financial management expertise. This is the exact provision which was given in the suggested answers also. Then I did an analysis that the provision of LODR will be applicable as it listed its securities. It should have at least 5 ID, that is 2/3 of 7. All of its members as having the ability to read and understand the FS, and at least one should have financial management expertise. And therefore the existing audit committee cannot continue after listing the securities and will have to change its composition as per LODR 2015. I've only scored 3 marks. Okay, this question was of 4 marks and I've scored 3 out of 4 marks. Okay, that's all right. I've lost 1 mark. I don't know why. Since it is a theoretical paper, you tend to lose marks. But then everything is up to the mark. If you see the answer which I have framed over here, first I wrote the regulation number, then I wrote the provision, then I analyzed the provision, and finally I wrote the conclusion. This is the format which you should follow in your examination as well. Let's quickly see question number 4C. In the light of the provisions of FCRA, examine and decide whether the following persons in India are permitted to receive the amount articles in the following situations. Messrs. KG and C, a partnership firm, obtained loans from a club registered in London for its business purpose. Hello FM, a registered association, received funds from a foreign company for established frequency model radio station. And Mr. Happy received a wristwatch as marriage anniversary gift from his uncle, a citizen of USA, the market value of which is rupees 25,000. Let's quickly see what they have written in the suggested answers. As per section 2J of the FCRA 2010, foreign source includes a society, club or other association or individual formed or registered outside India. Accordingly, in the given case, amount received by Messrs. KG and Company being a partnership firm is not covered under the above provisions from club registered in London for its business purpose is permissible. Okay, since it is not covered under the above provision because foreign source includes a society, club or other association or individual formed or registered outside India. This was a loan received by a partnership firm. It is not included in the above definition and therefore this is permissible. Next, as per section 3, no foreign contribution shall be accepted by any association or company engaged in the production or broadcast of audio news or visual news or current affairs programs. Okay, therefore Hello FM is not permitted to receive any funds from a foreign company. As per the provisions of FCRA, foreign contribution means the donation, delivery or transfer made by any foreign source of any article not being an article given to a person as a gift for his personal use if the market value does not exceed rupees 25,000. Okay, in the given situation, Mr. Happy received a wristwatch as marriage anniversary gift from his uncle. Since the value of the wristwatch is within the prescribed limit, hence he is permitted to receive the article. Okay, so as per the relevant provisions of FCRA, this was a very easy question if you're clear with the provisions of FCRA. I'll quickly show you how I had written the answer to this question in my examination and how many marks I was able to fetch. So first I wrote the act. See, because there were many sections involved, what I did, I wrote the name of the act, that is Foreign Contribution Regulation Act 2010. Since I wrote the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, whatever sections I am going to quote now, they are of FCRA only and not of any other act. So I wrote the provisions. An association engaged in the business of broadcasting audio news is prohibited to accept FC, foreign contribution, if this is given in section 3. A gift received from any person having a market value in India not exceeding 25,000 is not foreign contribution as per section 2(1)(h) of FCRA. Again, I am telling you repeatedly that these sections and provisions which I have memorized, it would be easier if you jot it down on a separate piece of paper and don't get shocked by the fact that I was able to quote each and every section number. Despite the fact that I was able to quote each and every section number, I didn't score good marks in this paper. I seriously don't know the reason why this had happened with me. But never mind. You can anyway quote the section name and section number and you can score good marks. Then analysis is that there is no prohibition in the entire act for a partnership firm to obtain loan from a foreign source for the purpose of the business. Okay, and based on this analysis and provision, I wrote the conclusion that Messrs. KG and Company will be permitted to receive the loan because partnership firm is not covered by FCRA. Then Hello FM is prohibited to obtain foreign contribution. Why? Because of Section 3 of FCRA. And since the market value does not exceed 25,000, it is not a foreign contribution, and hence the provisions of this act are not attracted. Thus, Mr. Happy is permitted to receive the entire amount, the entire object, that is the wristwatch. If you see, I have only scored 3 marks here. Okay, I just showed you the suggested answers, and I have written exactly the same thing which is there in the suggested answers. I have also quoted the section name, section 3, section 4, section 2, 1, 8, and still I have only scored 3 marks. See, this paper, this particular question was of 6 marks. Okay, if I'm not wrong, it is of 6 marks. And out of 6 marks, I've only secured 3 marks. I seriously don't know why I've secured 3 marks. I've showed you the suggested answers, and I've also showed you my answers, which are up to the mark itself. So even if you don't write the section number, it's all right. Despite the fact that I had written the section number, still I only scored 3 out of 6 marks. I don't know what was going in the mind of examiner, that he was just reducing my marks. Okay, now let's see the next question. I hope you're understanding how do we present in the examination. This is question number 1A. Let's quickly see the suggested answers first. Yeah. Question number 1. You are the CFO and in charge of legal compliances of large multinational company in India. The board of directors of the company are broad-based and comprised of competent directors who are Indian as well as foreign nationals. Okay. Mr. X, who is a director on the board, is very often on business tour abroad. He approached you and wants to know from you the regulatory provisions of the Companies Act 2013 relating to appointment of alternate directors. Analyze the following situation and advise suitably. To how many directors can a person be appointed as an alternate director, and how many votes does he have in one board meeting? If the original director joins the board meeting through video conferencing without returning to India, then can the alternate director appointed in his place attend the same board meeting? If yes, whose presence and vote will be counted? In case of private companies where an alternate director is appointed in place of a non-executive director, then what will be the tenure of such alternate director provided the original director does not return to India for a longer period, say 3 to 4 years? And can an executive director, whole-time director or managing director be appointed as alternate? Okay, can they appoint alternate directors? Okay, let's see the answer in the certified copies. As per section 161, the BOD of a company may, if so authorized by articles or by resolution passed by the company, appoint the person not being a person holding any alternate directorship for any other director in the company or holding directorship in the same company to act as an alternate director. Okay. And no person shall hold office as a director, including any alternate directorship, in more than 20 companies at the same time. However, the maximum number of public companies shall not exceed 10. Hence, in the instant case, a person can be appointed as an alternate director for only one director in the same company, but maximum 20 different companies. An alternate director will have only one vote, as he can hold alternate directorship for one director only. Okay, so this was the suggested answer. This was an easy question of 2 marks. Let's see how many marks I have secured. Okay, so see, even I wrote the section 161 which is given in the suggested answers. Then I wrote the provision that no person shall be appointed as an alternate director if he is an alternate director for any other director or is holding directorship in the same company. This was the exact provision given in the suggested answers. Therefore, a person can be appointed as an alternate director for only one person in the same company and not more than that. He will have one vote in the board meeting in place of the original director, as the decisions in a board meeting are decided by resolution by majority unless specifically required by law. So I was able to score 1 out of 2 marks. Let's read the next question. Yeah, we already read the next question. So the answer to that question is that the office of alternate director is separate from the attendance of the original director in the board meeting. And as per 161(2), an alternate director is appointed to hold the office of original director during his absence. Accordingly, as far as attendance in board meeting by the original director is concerned, an alternate director may continue to hold office even if the original director joins the meeting by video conferencing, but the original director will be deemed to have joined only as an invitee, and the attendance of alternate directors shall be counted for the purpose of board meeting. This is specific only with respect to matters which shall not be dealt with through video conferencing. In such matters where video conferencing is allowed, voting of original director will be counted. Okay, if video conferencing is allowed, then original director has to vote. If video conferencing is not allowed, then alternate director has to vote. I think I've done a mistake in this question. The original director can join the board meeting through video conferencing, else he will have to vacate his office if he absents himself from all the board meetings for a period of 12 months. In that case, the alternate director can attend the board meeting, but the presence and vote of the original director will be counted. So I've taken only 1 mark out of 2 marks. Okay, that's all right. Then C part, according to second proviso to 161(2), an alternate director shall not hold office for a period longer than that permissible to the director in whose place he has been appointed, and shall vacate his office as soon as the original director returns to India. Okay, if the term of the office of original director is determined before he returns to India, then any provision for the automatic reappointment of the retiring director in default of another appointment shall apply to the original director and not to the alternate director. Okay, so if the original director returns to India, then all the provisions would be applicable to the original director because the alternate director has to vacate his office. However, if the original director does not return to India and his appointment or automatic reappointment happens when he is outside India, the provisions would be applicable to that director and not the alternate director. Therefore, in the instant case, the alternate director shall hold office till the time original director returns to India, even if the period is as long as 3 to 4 years. See, I've written the same thing. An alternate director shall have to vacate his office as soon as the original director returns to India. The term of the alternate director as per Companies Act is the unexpired term of the original director or the date when he returns, whichever is earlier. Since the term of the original director is indefinite, the alternate director shall continue till the original director returns to India. I think I should have it scored 2 out of 2 marks here. I don't know why I've lost 1 mark. But see, I'm just explaining you what are the methods and how do we write answers in the examination. This is the purpose of this lesson, okay? And next choose what? As per 161(2), the BOD of a company, if so authorized by the article, okay, so BOD can appoint, okay, not a managing director, appoint a person as an alternate director. Therefore, from the above provision, it is clear that an alternate director can be appointed for any director, but only by the board of directors. The alternate director can be appointed only by the board of directors and not the managing director or the executive director or the whole-time director. This is the same thing which I have done. Okay, I've scored 1 out of 2 marks in this question also. When a director leaves outside India for a period of 3 months or more, then the board of directors, see, I have also underlined this, then the board of directors shall appoint an alternate director if they are authorized by the articles of association or by an ordinary resolution by shareholders in general meeting. Thus, an executive director, whole-time director cannot appoint alternate director. Okay, I hope this is clear to all of you. I hope the presentation is clear to all of you and you are able to analyze how to present answers in the examination. Here what I did, first I wrote the provisions, I wrote the section number, and directly I jumped down to the conclusions. The answers will be as follows of A, B, C and D. Okay, I don't know why I've lost 4 marks. I think I should have scored at least 6 out of 8 marks considering the depth and the accuracy of the answers as compared to the suggested answers, but never mind. Question number 1B. Yeah, let's read question number 1B now. The Articles of Association of DEF Limited, a non-government company, restricts the company to contribute to National Defence Fund for a sum not exceeding 5 lakhs. The articles is silent about contribution to bona fide charitable fund and to a political party. This is 181, 182 and 183 section number question. The company earned net profit during the last financial years. Okay, this is given, net profits. The BOD proposes to contribute in July 19 for the first time during the financial year 1920. Okay, so these are the amounts: 7 lakhs to National Defence Fund, 3 lakhs to a bona fide charitable fund and 5 lakhs to a political party. The company seeks your advice on the following matters in respect of each of the above proposals under the provisions of the Companies Act 2013. The appropriate approving authority, the quantum of contribution and the mode of payment. Let's quickly read the suggested answers and let's compare it with my certified copy. Okay, so appropriate approving authority in case of National Defence Fund, this is governed by section 183. The board of directors of any company has the power. It may contribute such amount as it seems fit to the National Defence Fund. Okay. In case of bona fide charitable fund, it is governed by section 181(1). Here also the board of directors of a company may contribute to bona fide charitable and other funds. However, prior permission of the company in general meeting shall be required for such contribution if it exceeds 5% of its average net profits for the 3 immediately preceding financial years. This is important. And in case of political party, which is governed by section 182, a company may contribute any amount to any political party. However, no such contribution shall be made by a company unless a resolution authorizing the making of such contribution is passed in the BOD meeting. That is, the authority is nothing but the board of directors. Okay, these are the approving authorities. Then next they have asked us the quantum of contribution. In case of National Defence Fund, any amount can be contributed. Hence, the company can contribute 7 lakh to National Defence Fund in spite of the restriction by the company to contribute in any financial year, because Section 183 is going to prevail over the articles of the company, and therefore the provision in the articles of the company is not going to be affected, because section always prevails the articles of association, and there is no limit. Despite the fact that there was limit in the articles, the section would prevail over the articles, and hence the 7 lakh amount can be contributed. For a bona fide charitable fund, the board of directors has to authorize that if it exceeds 5% of the average net profit, then shareholders meeting has to be conducted and their resolution has also to be passed. However, the 5% of average net profits are rupees 1.5 lakhs. Since it does not exceed rupees 3 lakhs, no requirement of general meeting has to be there, and therefore board of directors are the approving authority. For a political party, board of directors are the approving authority, and therefore may contribute any amount directly or indirectly to any political party, and therefore the approving authority is nothing but the board of directors. In mode of payment, in National Defence Fund, no mode of payment is provided. Again, in bona fide charitable fund, no mode of payment is provided. So you can pay through any mode, but in political party, there is a mode of payment that it shall not be made except by an account pay check or account pay drawn on a bank, or an account pay bank draft, or ECS through a bank account. However, a company may make contribution to any instrument issued pursuant to any scheme. Okay, that's all right. So this is the mode of payment. Let's quickly see my certified copy. See, first what I did, I wrote the name of the act, that is Companies Act 2013. Then I wrote the provision. What is the provision? It can contribute an amount not exceeding 5% of the average profits of preceding 3 financial years to a charitable fund. This is given in section 181. Then I wrote section 182. Then I wrote section 183. Here I have made a mistake in section 183. Actually, I had written it correctly that articles will not have any effect, but I cut it. I was very confused in the examination because I was not sure whether section would prevail over the articles or the article would prevail, because there are some sections in which the section writes that the articles would prevail if there has been something specifically written in the articles of association. I thought that section 183 states that if article has a lower amount, then the articles would be given effect, but then I was wrong, and therefore this answer has been wrong. Okay, so for charitable fund, the approving authority is what? Ordinary resolution by shareholders, as the amount is in excess of 1,50,000, which is 5% of 30 lakhs. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. So in suggested answers, the amount is in excess of, it is in excess of 3 lakhs. Okay, so 5% of average net profits is 1.5 lakhs, and since it is in excess of rupees 3 lakhs, it requires prior permission of the company in general meetings. I'm sorry, I was wrong in saying that it does not require prior permission. In fact, it does require prior permission. Okay. Then for political contribution, the approving authority is board of directors, and for National Defence Fund, it is also board of directors. The quantum of contribution after an ordinary resolution 3 lakhs, political contribution 5 lakhs, and National Defence Fund rupees 7 lakhs. The quantum of contribution is correct. I should have scored 2 out of 2 marks here at least. And the mode of payment is also correct. Any mode for charitable and National Defence Fund, and the mode specified above for the political contribution, namely these modes which I have written, shall not be made otherwise by an account pay check, account pay draft, electronic clearing system, or any other mode specified by any law for the time being in force. These are the modes which are acceptable by a political party as per section 182 of the Companies Act. I should have scored 2 out of 2 marks in this question as well. I don't know why the examiner gave me only 1 mark, and I was able to score only 4 plus 3, 7 marks out of 14 marks. Okay, so that's just 50%, which is terrible. Let's analyze the next questions. So the next questions are going to be similar itself. So question 5A. So the point of discussing these answers are how I had presented in my examination answer sheet. Okay. Due to an unprecedented flood, all the fixed assets of a company were damaged extensively beyond renovation or repair. The cost of replacement of assets were huge, and the sum insured on the fixed assets did not cover all the assets. Therefore, the operations of the company were permanently discontinued. Meanwhile, based on a winding up petition filed by the secured creditors, the High Court passed a winding up order. The workers of the company opposed to the winding up petition and also filed an appeal against the winding up order. The workers are not sure whether this appeal would be heard in the winding up proceedings examined under the provisions of Companies Act, whether the appeal filed by the workers would succeed or not. Let's see section 279. Section 279 states that when a winding up order has been passed, no suit or other legal proceedings shall be commenced, or if pending at the date of the winding up order, shall be proceeded with by or against the company, except with the leave, that is permission of the tribunal, and subject to such terms as the tribunal may impose. Any application to the tribunal seeking leave under this section shall be disposed of within 60 days. However, the above provision shall not apply to any proceeding pending in appeal before Supreme Court or High Court. Also, according to provisions of section 325, 6 and 7, in the winding up of a company, the workman's dues shall be paid in priority to all other debts ranking pari passu with secured creditors. The High Court has already passed the winding up order of the company, hence the workman can appeal against the winding up order, but only with the permission of the tribunal and subject to such terms as the tribunal may impose. Further, the dues interest will be protected in priority. Okay, let's see what I have written and how many marks I have scored. I wrote section 326 of Companies Act. I wrote, in the event of winding up, the following payments will be paid in priority: the workman's dues, dues of secured creditors, and to the extent they rank pari passu with the dues of other workmen. I did the analysis of section 326 and 27, which is given in the suggested answers, mainly that the dues of the workmen as well as the secured creditors shall be paid in priority and it shall abate in equal proportion. And finally, I wrote the conclusion that the appeal filed by the workers would succeed and their dues will be protected in priority. So I've scored 2 marks out of 4 marks. I think this question is of 4 marks. Okay, I don't know why I've lost 2 marks. I think I did not write section 279. That's why I've missed out on a couple of marks in this question. Okay, let's see question number 5B. Messrs. KIL Limited, a listed company, proposed to acquire a plant for consideration other than cash from Mr. KK, a director. The MD of the company identified Mr. JK, a registered valuer, under the provisions of the Companies Act for the purpose of valuation of the plant. Mr. KK acquired the plant 48 months back from a partnership firm in which the spouse of Mr. JK is a partner. The MD of the company issued an order appointing Mr. JK as a registered valuer. MD cannot issue. Examine and decide whether the decision of appointment and the mode of appointment is valid or not. This was also a fairly easier question. Okay. I think the question number 5B only, right? Okay. As per section 192, no company shall enter into an arrangement by which a director of the company or its holding subsidiary or associate company acquires assets for consideration other than cash from the company, or the company acquires or is to acquire assets for consideration other than cash from such director. Okay. The relaxation is there. The company may enter into an arrangement involving non-cash transactions if prior approval for such arrangement is accorded by a resolution of the company in general meeting. Okay, this has been given. I think this is of no relevance. I have not written this. Yeah, this is relevant. As per section 247(2), the valuer shall not undertake valuation of any asset in which he has a direct or indirect interest or becomes so interested at any time during a period of 3 years prior to his appointment as a valuer or 3 years after the valuation of assets was conducted by him. Okay. Now, as for the facts of the question, KIL Limited acquired plant from consideration other than cash from Mr. KK, director. The Act has restricted such a non-cash transaction. The company can enter only if it obtains prior approval in the general meeting. Yeah, this was important. The MD of the company identified Mr. JK as a registered valuer. He has acquired the plant 4 years back from a partnership firm in which spouse of JK is a partner. Since 4 years is more than 3 years, this is not going to affect, and therefore Mr. JK can be validly appointed as a registered valuer. However, as per section 247(1), the valuer can be appointed only by the board of directors or the audit committee, and they cannot be appointed by a managing director. Therefore, the mode of appointment is not valid as is appointed by the managing director of the company. In the suggested answers, this is given, and in my certified copy, let's see what I've written. I've only written section 247 of the Companies Act. I think I did not mention section 195. It was section 195, right? Yeah, section 192. So I did not mention section 192. That's why I think I lost major marks here. So I wrote section 247. I wrote a registered valuer shall be appointed by the BOD or audit committee, and in the absence of audit committee, it shall be appointed by BOD. Okay, I wrote the provision of 3 years also, and I did an analysis that 4 years is more than 3 years, and accordingly I wrote the conclusion that JK can be appointed as a registered valuer, However, only the audit committee or in their absence the BOD can appoint, and hence the appointment by MD is invalid. And I scored 2 out of 4 marks. I think this was a 4 marks. Let's see. Yeah, this is a 4 marks. So I was able to score 2 out of 4 marks. That is 50% only. Let's see question number C. In view of the deep recession prevailing in the market for the past 3 years, Infra Limited corporate data, which was facing the brunt of financial crisis, could not pay salaries and wages to its workmen and employees for the past 6 months. The workmen and the employees, who are the members of a recognized trade union, Infra Labour Federation, made a complaint in this regard. Thereafter, the trade union approached and urged the management of the company in person and through representations in writing to settle the arrears of wages and salaries due to its members. The corporate debtor neither disputed nor took any actions to settle the amount. Under the circumstances, Infra Labour Federation filed an application before the adjudicating authority, that is with NCLT, for initiating a corporate insolvency resolution process. Determine the validity of the application and what is the initiation date as per the IBC Act. So what happened? Corporate debtor was facing a brunt of financial crisis and it could not pay the amount to its workmen and employees for the past 6 months, and therefore these workmen and employees formed a trade union and they approached the adjudicating authority to file an insolvency process. Okay, determine the validity of the application and determine the initiation date. Okay, so we have to define what an operational creditor is. First of all, it is a person to whom an operational debt is owed and includes any person to which such debt has been legally assigned. Then we have to define what an operational debt means. It means a claim in respect of provision of goods or services including employment, or a debt in respect of the repayment of dues arising under any laws. Okay, if there is any dues arising in the course of employment, then that will be considered as an operational debt, and the person to whom such operational debt is owed shall be treated as operational creditor. Since this is an operational debt, the workers, that is the employees, would be treated as operational creditors, and therefore they would be eligible to file the insolvency process against the company as per the relevant provisions of IBC. Person has also been defined under section 323. A trade union, when registered under the Trade Union Act, could come within the purview of any other entity established. Okay, this was an interesting part. Trade union is also a person as per section 323. Then as per section 8 and section 9, an operational creditor can file an application to the NCLT. This is nothing but an analysis of section 8 and section 9, and the initiation date has been defined over here as per section 511. This is the initiation date. Okay, and finally they have written the conclusion that workmen and employees can file an application and this is valid, and the initiation date is what? After expiry of 10 days from the date of serving demand notice to Infra Limited. Okay, and the date of filling out of the application before the NCD will be the date of initiation. So this is the date of initiation of her, and that is the application date. Okay, I have written similarly in the certified copy, but I have made a mistake. First, I wrote section 6 that who all can file a corporate insolvency resolution process. Mainly these 3 persons can file the insolvency. Then I defined the financial creditor. Then I defined an operational creditor. Then I defined the financial debt. I was wrong in stating that this is not operational creditor, so I scored 0 marks here because I told that it is liable to be dismissed. I thought that employees are not operational creditors. However, they are, as per the recent judgment also given by some court. I don't remember the judgment's name. And I wrote the definition of initiation date, because of which I was able to score 1 mark. So I was able to score only 1 mark out of 6 marks in this question. So this is 1 out of 6, a very poor score. Okay. So the format of writing the answer is appropriate, but I did not write the answers. I am only, he has not given me any marks for this. I don't know why. At least I should have got 1 mark for section 6, which is relevant. I should have got 1 mark for operational creditor's definition also. But alright, I did not secure even a single mark for the provisions. And the section name, I only scored 1 mark for the conclusion. I think the examiner is giving only marks to my conclusion and not to any of my provisions and analysis. So I don't know, but this is not going to happen with you, trust me. So don't get worried that even if the paper is written up to the mark and even if I have written all the section number, I have scored very less. This is not going to happen with you, of course. Every examiner is different and his style of checking is going to be different. Okay. Let's see question number 6A. Yep, question number 6A. Mr. K is a small shareholder director. in KGP Tires Limited from 1st April 2018, and then VSR Cotton Mills Limited from 1st April 2019 in compliance with the relevant provisions of Companies Act. He has not paid interest on the public deposits. In the light of the information given above, examine the following under the provisions of the Companies Act. Whether the office of Mr. K. SSD shall become vacant. If yes, state the period from which the office of directorship shall become vacant. I have attempted this question, so I will be discussing this question only. 6. According to Rule 7, a person shall not be appointed as a SSD if the person is not eligible for appointment in terms of Section 164. Okay. As per Section 167, the office of director shall become vacant in case he incurs any of the disqualification under Section 164. Okay, when he incurs disqualification under Section 164, the office of the director shall become vacant in all companies other than the company which is in default under that subsection. Then he shall incur a disqualification for a period of 6 months from the date of his appointment. In the instant case, he has not paid interest on the public deposit due from 1st July 18, and disqualification is attracted who has failed to repay the deposits for a period of more than 1 year. Therefore, the office of Mr. K shall become vacant as he has become disqualified under Section 164 from 1st July 19 but not in KGP Tires Limited, and Mr. K's office of directorship shall become vacant from 1st July 2019, which is the same. I have also written the same thing in my certified copy C. First, I wrote Section 164.2 and 167. I wrote Section 164.2. This is entire Section 164.2. Then I wrote Section 167, and then I did the analysis that if the default subsists till 1st July 19, then Mr. K will have to immediately vacate his office in VSR Cotton Mills and will be disqualified for reappointment in the defaulting company. So conclusion is what? He will have to vacate his office in VSR Cotton Mills and can continue as director in KGP Tires Limited. This is given in the suggested answers. He shall vacate office in VSR Cotton Mills on 1st July 19 and shall be disqualified for reappointment. He will also be disqualified for a period of 5 years. Despite the fact that entire answer was correct, I only scored 2 marks. So don't be scared or don't be afraid that even you would lose marks. I don't know why I did not score good marks. All the other friends of mine have scored good marks in law, but then my examiner would have been different. So remember, what I'm trying to say over here is that the format of writing the answer should be neat, appropriate, and clean. Look at the way of writing the answer. First, I wrote the section name, then I wrote the provision name, so the provision of the section, then I wrote the analysis, and finally the conclusion. So I've been repeating multiple times that this should be the format which you should follow in order to score good marks. Okay. So provision, analysis, then section name, provision, analysis, and conclusion. This should be the order. So question 6b, now what I would do, I would quickly show you the answers of my certified copy because we have to discuss the certified copy of audit as well. So I would be quickly discussing the certified copy of law. So these questions are given in the on the ICS website also. You can refer the questions and quickly we'll just see the way of presenting the answers in the examination. This entire question I have bluffed. I did not remember the provisions. This was a question relating to the procedure for surrendering the DIN. So I was just bluffed. I did not follow the format of provision, case analysis, and conclusion because this is not a case study question. This is a question which is based on the normal theory, that is surrendering of DIN. Then I was able to score 1 mark here, that CG will verify the particulars, so filled. This is normal provision and I scored 1 mark here also. He will only use one DIN and section 155 reference I had quoted. Once the application is complete, CG shall accordingly deactivate the DIN of the applicant. So yeah, this was a normal theoretical question. I have scored 2 out of 4 marks. I have scored only 1 mark. This question I was not able to attempt actually. This is of Prevention of Money Laundering Act. And I only scored 1 mark, that the car can be confiscated even if it is hypothecated to a nationalized bank. So I'm not discussing the question and answers now because I think the main objective was to explain you how to present answers in your examination, and I think that has now been clarified. Okay. Similarly, for the next questions, I've done the same analysis and I've done the same analysis and I've followed the same format. Section, then I wrote the provision. I also wrote the rule, that is 21C of the Companies Registration of Foreign Companies Rules. Then I wrote the conclusion accordingly. Okay. Here I was fortunate enough to get good marks, 2, 2, and 1. No, still all the answers are correct. If you read all the answers, they are correct, but I have only scored 5 out of 8 marks, despite the fact that all the answers are up to the mark. I have also wrote the rule, sub-rule, and the clause of that rule also. Okay. So I don't know why I have lost marks, but then I hope the format of writing the answer is now clear to all of you. This question I've just left. I was not able to secure even a single mark because I did not remember the provision of Prevention of Money Laundering Act, and therefore I scored 0 in this question. See, this is 0. I was just writing some of the other things. Okay, so I've scored 5 marks in my first question of Rule 213 of FCRA of foreign companies. And this is how you present answers in your examination. Okay, I hope you have now understood how to present answers in the examination. Quickly, I would tell you what should be the strategy for MCQs as far as law subject is concerned. See, I would just write the major points. I've been telling you multiple times that focus on ICI questions. That is questions from previous attempts, RTPs, MTPs, and the ICI sample questions given on website. Avoid using reference books of any author for MCQs, okay? For MCQs I'm saying. Because the reference books, they only have the provisions as fill in the blanks, and what they do, they just give the last word as the fill in the blanks, and they give 4 possible options. That's useless. I had remembered that I solved one author's MCQ book for 2 or 3 days, and I had wasted 2 or 3 days. Trust me, I did not find it useful at all. So avoid using reference books, focus on ICI material, and try to read modules for MCQs, because MCQs can be asked from any portion of the modules. Also, try to memorize penalties. These can be asked in MCQs by writing them on a separate piece of paper and revising them daily in the morning. Okay, these are going to be tested in MCQs. Giving my attempt example, in my MCQs, we were asked questions based on the number of days which is required to be submitted. This document is submitted within how many days. You were asked 6 to 7 MCQs wherein all the options were same. 15 days, 30 days, 45 days and 60 days. These 4 options were given in almost 6 questions, and it was very difficult for me to remember which option, which question had the correct answer. So it is going to be very difficult. If you draw charts by yourself or prepare your own notes, that is definitely going to help you a lot. Okay, let's switch to audit now. In auditing, I have scored 37 out of, this is out of 70, and 23 out of 30 in the MCQs, which is nothing but 59. 22, not 23. Okay, so this is my audit paper. Let's quickly analyze the certified copy of audit. So I have solved question number 2A first. Let's see question number 2. The entity risk assessment process includes how management identifies business risks relevant to the preparation of FS in accordance with the entity's applicable FRFW, estimates their significance, assesses the likelihood of occurrence, and decides upon actions to respond and to manage them and results thereof. This is not at all relevant, okay? Trust me, only this question is relevant. Elucidate the circumstances in which risks can arise or change. This is what is relevant. And friends, if you trust me, this is given in the module specifically in terms of bullet points. If you see the suggested answers, this has also been given in the risk management module, and this is the answer. That risk can arise or change due to changes in operating environment, new personnel, revamped information systems, rapid growth, new technology, corporate restructuring, new accounting pronouncements. That is Ind AS. Okay, quickly I'll show you my certified copy. I've written the same things and I've scored 5 out of 5 marks. See, risk can arise or change due to new personnel, new or revamped information systems, expanded FOs, new accounting pronouncements, and rapid growth, change in technology, new business models. Okay, so remember, he is going to give you marks for each and every keyword which you have written, and even if you explain it in your own words, you are going to fetch 5 out of 5 marks. This is how I was able to score 5 out of 5 marks in this particular question. There is no presentation requirement here because this was a normal bullet point question wherein you had to write all the bullet points. Let's see question number 2B. CAG was appointed by DP Limited as statutory auditor. While doing the audit of DP Limited, he observed that certain loans and advances were made without proper securities, trade receivables and trade payables were adjusted inter se, and personal expenses were charged to revenue. Comment as a company auditor. This is also an easy question. See, we are required to write the provisions of section 143(1). Okay, so section 143(1)(a) clause A, 143(1), so 143(1)(a), 143(1)(b), and 143(1)(e). They have written a lot of details over here. Even if you don't write in such detail, that would be all right. See, I wrote section 143(1). Then I wrote 143.1a. I wrote 143.1b. Then I wrote 143.1e. I don't know why I didn't receive marks for these section name and section number. I think I should have received at least 1 or 2 marks for these section name and section number. That's all right. Then I wrote that the auditor has to report on these modifications only if the answer to the question is in adverse. That is when there are modifications. Okay. Therefore, in accordance with the above, the auditor has to report that the loans and advances are made without proper securities, the amount of debtors and creditors have been offset, and personal expenses have been expensed off. I only secured 2 marks out of 5 marks. I think I should have secured at least 3 or 4 marks because I have quoted all the section name and section number and the relevant provisions as well. That's all right. I hope that the presentation is clear to all of you. You have to write the section name and the section number in the bracket if it is different for every bullet point. As it is different for every bullet point, instead of writing it at the top, I wrote it beside the bullet point itself. This is how I had presented my audit paper. Let's see question number 2C. This is a code of ethics question. Yeah. Comment with reference to the CA Act and schedules thereto. A special notice has been issued for a resolution at 3rd AGM of LED, providing expressly that CA Anup shall not be reappointed as an auditor of the company. Consequently, Anup submitted a representation in writing to the company with a request to circulate to the members. In the representation, he included the contributions made by him in strengthening the control procedures and also indicated his willingness to continue as an auditor if reappointed by the shareholders. He is guilty as per the relevant clause. Let's see my certified copy. See, as per clause 6 of part 1 of first schedule, the provision is as follows. So you get a mark for the provision. See, 1 mark for the provision. He is guilty of misconduct. Then as per the analysis, you get the mark. I have done the analysis as per the section of the Companies Act. See, this is a wrong section which I have quoted. This section is section 140. I had written it first. This is the correct section. Section 139 is wrong. But still I got marks. I don't think he gave me marks for analysis. So remember, if you are not sure of the section name and section number, do not write it at all. So do not write wrong section number. This is a very important advice. See, I did not secure even a single mark because I wrote a wrong section number. But this section number was correct, section 115, but I did not score a mark for analysis. And the conclusion was also correct. Therefore, I was able to score only 2 marks for the conclusion and the provision. This is 2 out of 5. So I scored only 9 marks here. Let's see the next question. Okay, I'll just repeat the format for writing the code of ethics questions. First, write the clause. Then write the provision, what that clause says. See, if you see, I've scored 1 mark for clause, okay, and I've also scored 1 mark for the provision. I don't know why he did not give me a mark in the earlier question, wherein I have written the clause name also. I think that completely depends on the mood of the examiner. See, now I have not scored a mark in my analysis here. I don't know why I did not score a mark in my analysis. Okay, and finally the conclusion. So question number 5A now. Let's read question number 5. Mr. K, a practicing chartered accountant, is the proprietor of Messrs. K and Company since 1995. He went abroad in the month of December 18. He delegated the authority to Mr. Y, a chartered accountant, his employee, for taking care of the important matters of his office. During his absence, Mr. Y has conducted the undermentioned job in the name of Messrs. K and Company. He issued net worth certificate to a client and he attended the GST proceedings for a client as authorized representative. Please comment on eligibility of Mr. Y for conducting such jobs and liability, this is also important, and liability of Mr. K under the CA Act. I did a very, very huge blunder. I did not read this sentence that liability also have to write down, and therefore I lost 1 or 2 marks because I did not write the penalty despite the fact that I knew what the penalty was in case there is a misconduct happening because of this clause of the code of ethics. Okay, let's quickly read my certified copies answer. See, first I wrote the clause, then I wrote the provision that the council has clarified that the chartered accountant may delegate routine matters to his employee, and I wrote the clause as that he shall be held guilty of misconduct if he allows any person, not being his partner or member of institute, to sign reports on his behalf. Then I did an analysis that issuing a net worth certificate will not be considered to be a routine matter and therefore this is not valid. Then I wrote the conclusion which was correct. See, I have scored 4 marks. I've lost 1 mark. See, 4 out of 5. I did not write the penalty. So penalty was also required to be written. Since I did not read the question carefully, I lost 1 mark over here, and because of that, I did not score an exemption also. I lost an exemption by 1 mark in this paper. So it is very important to read the questions very carefully so that you can have a good understanding and you can score good marks in the examination. Okay, so let's see the next question. Question number 5B. B Limited, a company incorporated in India, has 6 members in its audit committee. Due to recessionary conditions, the revenue of the company is going down and there is slowdown in other activities. Therefore, it is expected that there would not be significant work for members of the audit committee. Considering the overall recession in the company and the economy, the members of the committee decided unanimously to meet only once at the year end. They reviewed monthly information system of the company and found no errors. If you see, this is a test your knowledge question of module. As an auditor, would you consider the decision taken by the audit committee to hold the meeting once in a year in complying with the LODR? Also state the quorum requirements for such meetings. Let's switch to my certified copy and let's see how I've written this answer. This is up to the mark and I think I've scored the maximum mark. See, I wrote the regulation. I have written the same regulation in the law paper also because it is the same regulation related to audit committee, which is regulation 18 of LODR. I wrote the provision that the audit committee shall meet at least 4 times in a year and not more than 120 days gap should happen. Moreover, the audit committee has to mandatorily review the following. Okay, so I have scored half mark for each and every bullet point. RPT, that is related party transaction, appointment remuneration of chief internal auditor, internal audit report and the weaknesses, the management observation on internal control weaknesses and any statement of deviation. Okay, so see, they have given half mark for each and every bullet point. Okay, so 2.5 marks for all the bullet points, half mark for the provision, that is 3 marks, and analysis, and finally half mark for the conclusion. I think I should have had scored 1 mark for the conclusion, but that's all right. So I've scored 3.5 marks. So quorum has also been given. So this is the conclusion. I think I should have scored half mark here and half mark for the quorum. So this should have been 1 mark. So quorum is what? It should be 1/3 of the total strength or 2 directors, whichever is higher, with not less than 2 directors being the independent directors. This is the quorum as per the regulation 18 of LODR. This is the quorum. Okay, so I've scored 3.5 marks. 3.5 out of 5 marks. That's all right. Mr. X has been appointed as an auditor. Mr. X wants to be satisfied about the sufficiency and appropriateness of opening balances. This is the standards on auditing question. Lay down the audit procedure Mr. X should follow in the initial audit engagement. Also suggest the approach to be followed regarding mention in the audit report if he is not satisfied about the correctness of opening balances. Let's see the suggested answers first and then I would show you my certified copies answer. The audit procedures to be followed in case of initial audit engagement. So determine whether the prior period's closing balances have been correctly brought forward to the current period. Determine whether the opening balances reflect the application of appropriate accounting policies and performing one or more of the following. Whether prior year financial statements were audited, peruse the copies of the audited financial statements, evaluate whether audit procedures performed in the current period provide evidence relating to the opening balances, and finally, perform specific audit procedures to obtain evidence regarding the opening balances. So this should be the audit procedure, and then approach to be followed regarding mention in the audit report is that if the auditor is unable to obtain SAAE, that is sufficient appropriate audit evidence, he should express a qualified or disclaimer of opinion as appropriate. If he concludes that the misstatement materially affects the current period's financial statement and it is not properly accounted for, then adverse opinion should be issued. Okay, this is the suggested answers. Let's see what I've written in my certified copy. See the format. First, I wrote the essay name, that is 510. See, they have given a mark over here. So writing the name of an essay is so important. I've scored 1 mark because I wrote the name of the standards on auditing. Then I got half mark for the provision. He should perform audit procedure that will satisfy him that the opening balances are not materially misstated. Okay, so I was just bluffing. I just wrote he should verify the current assets liabilities, non-current assets liabilities. He should obtain a written representation. So I was just bluffing. I did not know the answer, frankly. So I just bluffed it. I scored 0 marks here. Then I wrote the conclusion. Okay, even if after performing the aforesaid procedure, the auditor is not satisfied, so I wrote he should qualify his report. If it is pervasive, then he should disclaim. and this should be mentioned in the other matter paragraph. So I have scored 2.5 marks out of 5 marks, which is appropriate. I think it's alright because I bluffed a lot of things over here. I scored 1 mark for writing the name of the standard on auditing also. Okay, it is very important to quote the name of standard on auditing because you score 1 mark by quoting the name. Let's see question number 6. The CNAG may direct the appointed auditor about the manner in which the accounts of the government company are required to be audited, and thereupon the auditor shall submit a copy of the audit report to the CNAG. What are the relevant sections of the Companies Act and steps involved in the audit of government companies? Quickly, I'll show you my certified copy. I've covered almost the entire thing. See. Now, here an important thing is that the question directly asks us what are the relevant sections. Okay, and here is the importance of quoting the section name and section number in the examination. Okay, for the students who ask me that is it important to memorize all the section name and section number? Yes, the answer to that question is yes, because there can be questions which directly ask what are the relevant sections, and these questions ask you to write the section name. Until and unless you write the section name, you wouldn't be able to score good marks. Okay, so it is very important to remember almost all the section name and section numbers because questions can be asked based on the section name directly. Okay, so I wrote section 139.5, then 139.7. This will be subject to audit by CNAG. Then I wrote section 143.6a, that is supplementary audit. Then I wrote the test audit, which is 143.6b. Okay, test audit is 143.7, I'm sorry. 143.6b is conduct or supplement to such report. Then I wrote 143.7. I also wrote section 19a of the Comptroller and Auditors General's Duties, Powers and Conditions of Service Act. This was given in section 143 subsection 7 of Companies Act, and I was able to score 3 marks. I think this is a 5-marker question out of 5 marks. I think I should have it got 4 marks, but I missed out on 1 point. That's why I was able to score 3 marks only. The point which I am trying to emphasize is that, see, the presentation should be, now this is not a case study question, this is a theoretical question. So first explain what is the theory involved, then write bullet points. It is very important to write the bullet points instead of paragraphs, because if you write paragraphs, then you are not going to fetch good marks because the examiner is not going to read the entire paragraph. So avoid writing in paragraphs, write in bullet points to fetch the maximum possible marks and to impress the examiner. Let's see question number 6b quickly. Mr. C, a CA employed as senior executive and not holding COP, recommends a particular lawyer to his employer in respect of a case. The lawyer, out of the professional fee received, paid a particular sum as a referral, comment with reference to the CA Act and schedules thereto. This is a misconduct. Let's see. There's 1 mark for the clause name, part name and the schedule name. Then I wrote the provision. There's 1 mark for the provision. I did an analysis and I scored 1 mark for the analysis. This is referral fees. He has accepted a share in the part of the profits of the company's lawyer. This may affect the integrity and the independence, and therefore he will be held guilty. 1 mark for the conclusion. So I've scored 4 out of 5 marks. I don't know why I've lost 1 mark. It's alright. But I hope you are understanding the format and the answers and the presentation which you have to do in your examination. Question number 6C. 6C was a question which I was not able to answer. So this is a question based on verification of defalcation of inventory. I wrote any particular thing which was coming to my mind. Let's check whether the physical count of inventory is done, verify the corresponding amounts on the supplier's ledger, examine the internal control system. I seriously wrote any particular point because I did not memorize this topic. It is very difficult for a human mind to memorize each and every point. So write whatever comes to your mind and avoid eliminating the question. Okay, so avoid not attempting the question totally. So write anything which you are able to write, like which you are able to recall, and at least you would be able to score 1 or 2 marks. See, I am able to score 2 marks out of 5 marks, which is a huge chunk. I did not memorize this. I wrote anything which came to my mind and I was able to score 2 marks here. See, obtain a record of subsequent sales, then check the net realizable value, whether it is valued at lower of cost and NRV, scrutinize the journal entries, whatever was coming to my mind, I wrote them and I was able to score 2 marks. This should be the approach, okay? Let's quickly discuss question number 4A. Now I would discuss the certified copies only because we have now understood how to present the answers in our examination. One important point, focus more on modules. Why? See, this is the perfect example of the question which has been directly asked from the chapter audit of NBFCs. This has been given in the last page of the chapter audit of NBFCs in the module. This question has not been given in any author's reference book, and you wouldn't find this question in any author's book, in my attempt at least. Okay, there are some authors who just copy the questions which are there in the past attempts. So this question you would find it now because it has been asked in the November 19. But in November 19, this question was not there in any reference book, and this was there in module last page of chapter Audit of NBFC. So the question was, what is the difference between Division 3 Schedule 2 and Division 3 Schedule 3? So I wrote all the differences which were there in the module, and for each and every difference I scored 1 mark. Okay. So remember, you have to write all the differences in bullet points, and you would be able to fetch the maximum marks. So I've scored 4 out of 5 marks. I think I should have had scored 5 on 5 here because I have written exactly the same thing which is given in the module. This question was on verification of credit card operations. Okay, so this is a question which frankly I did not memorize at all. Okay, this I had not revised in those 1.5 days, and trust me friends, I wrote some or the other thing which was coming to my mind. I had done a bank audit for the first 7 months during my articleship stage, and I wrote whatever was coming to my mind when I was checking the credit card operations. I had analyzed whether the expired cards are properly destroyed. I had verified the reconciliation of the physical stock of the credit card. Then whatever I had analyzed during my articleship days, I wrote that on my piece of paper, and still I was able to score good marks. See, I was able to score 2 marks at least. See, had I not attempted this question, I would have scored 0 marks, but I attempted and I wrote some or the other thing, because of which I was able to score 2 out of 4 marks. This is a huge chunk because you know what is the value of each and every mark in your CA final examination. And the last question had asked, what are the relevant clauses in Form 3CD? So this I was not aware, frankly. I wrote anything which was coming to my mind. I thought that at least I'll score 1 mark, but trust me, I was not able to score even a single mark because the answer was not expected in this manner. Okay, so there is a risk involved, of course, that you can score at least 1 or 2 marks. So I did not score even a single mark for this question, and I only scored 6 out of 14 marks. But remember, if you bluff, you can score at least 2 marks out of the 4 or 5 marks, which is huge chunk. Okay, so 2 out of 4 is nothing but 50%, which is a huge amount. Therefore, I request all of you to attempt the entire paper, even if you don't know the answer. Write some or the other thing which is relevant to that question, and trust me, you will be able to score good marks in that question as well. Okay, so here was my analysis of certified copies of auditing. Now let's quickly see the analysis of MCQ part for auditing. So I've scored 22 out of 30 in my MCQs. I'll just explain you what were the kind of MCQs which were asked in auditing paper. We were asked MCQs based on section number of Income Tax Act. Okay, so tax audit chapter is there in audit. So we were asked section 56(2)(7)(a), which has now been scrapped and has now been converted to section 56(2)(10) of the Income Tax Act. We were also asked questions based on the timeline of peer review, within how many days peer review has to be concluded. We were asked questions based on the NBFC chapter, what is the threshold limit for this NBFC. So the key points would be focus more on modules, focus on ICI material, that is the previous RTPs and MTPs, the ICI sample questions, and for theory paper, that is 70 marks, try to memorize the bullet points. So wherever you see bullet points in the module, you should definitely memorize them and solve all the test your knowledge questions. There are high possibilities that they can be asked in your examination. Okay, so I hope this analysis was useful for all of you. After the conclusion of this session, I hope that you would now be in a position to understand how to present your answers in your examination as far as theoretical papers like law and audit are concerned. Thank you so much for joining in for this video. Thank you so much for viewing this video entirely. I hope this is clear to all of you. So stay safe, take care, and see you in the next video.